Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to add a postscript to Independence Hall, going back there in time, and what it looked like, what it smelled like. You know, Independence Hall, which was the State House in Philadelphia, part of the mother country, is where the Second Continental Congress would meet at times. Not every day. They would often meet in taverns and restaurants and homes and apartments, whatever. Because first off, I'll repeat the name, the State House. It's part of the mother country, and of course, manned by folks that were doing things for the king. So if you are coming up with a document that is basically saying in the top of it treason, you're going to mind your P's and Q's as to where you discuss things, where you do things, and got to constantly look over your shoulder. Now, dining at the time, they ate at various places. Some food was brought in, some people cooked stuff. There was a lot of cases of food poisoning. You know, they had a privy nearby, as I mentioned, a three-holer. Now, at the three-holer, as I mentioned, was the communal brush, which you would put in salt water and shake it and then use it. And whatever was in the salt water, it was on you. Now, think of this. You know, you had like 40, 50 people in there. They're all wearing very heavy, outfits. Sometimes they would take their jackets off, but sometimes after they took it off, it might even be too much for the people there. There's no deodorants or anything like that. Sometimes they would wear perfumes, or sometimes they would wear bits of makeup, or they'd wear their wigs. And that's hot. And it was a hot spring. And so they're all in here. The windows are all closed because right next to Independence Hall was a barn for horses, and so there were flies everywhere. And if you can think of what these people smelled like organically, and coming in from the privy with whatever they got on them from the communal brush, that must have attracted tons of flies. So it's not a pretty scene. I always think about the fact that people say, I'd love to go back in time and be there. I think that we have become so distant from that time and that way of life that I would imagine that an individual today, if they could go back in time and walk into that room, they would be gagging because the stench would be that bad. But stench was an accepted part of life. Now, in many ways, they would put perfumes on to hide some of the stench, but the stench was still there. Of course, they also had what you might call like small areas for people to pee in within the building. Little chamber pots. Yeah, you got to remember, Franklin's not going to do a lot of walking. And Stephen Hopkins, had a great deal of a shake to his body. In fact, if you look at his signature, you can just see he's just like shaking. And these guys didn't travel too far. A lot of times they would just use a chamber pot, and that would just be put there. So they didn't even use the communal brush, or someone brought in a communal brush for them, perhaps. It's not pretty, okay? It's just a fact that, we don't think of. But I think it's an important thing to note historically that that's the case. Now, they were all drinking, as I mentioned. Brandy was very popular. Washington would drink Madeira wine. He would drink a bottle or two a day. There were various other wines, heavy wines. There was sometimes beer, but more often it was like brandy, beer, Madeira, port, things along those lines. And they were drunk quite heavily. You know, John Adams started his day with a gill of hard cider, which is about 7 ounces. And when he traveled, he talked about bringing barrels of various alcohol with him. You know, and of course, Washington, all of them drank. Well, the water in those days could have killed you sometimes. So you drank alcohol. It's an interesting thing. I mean, if we did this today, or if we had a body of individuals today, and they were creating the ideas of a country, and watched the amount of alcohol they drank, we would sit there and run them out of town. Because they said a bunch of drunks. Well, they weren't drunk. They were very used to this. You got to remember, children drank beer in those days. They had a near beer of sorts, but it was sterilized because, you know, in cooking the beer and making it. And the alcohol, of course, killed lots of things. The other thing is, think about those folks, the way they were dressed. They wore heavy outfits and the stockings and the heavy undergarments. And the temperature is 85, 90 degrees. The doors are closed. The windows are closed. And none of them had bathed in months. Franklin was looked upon as being kind of strange because he would bathe once a week. And people thought that was a little much. But it's kind of an interesting thing that you don't think of. Now also, Independence Hall didn't look like it does today. First off, Independence Hall, the clock tower that you see today with the big pointer, that didn't exist in 1776. That was added in the 19th century. There was a small square top to it that was not very ornate, and that's what existed at the top. Today, what's on top is a very, very different thing that no one in those days would recognize. Also, you know, there was roads around there, but they were all, you know, mud, covered with horse manure. Once again, more flies. And of course, you had to have scrapers outside because when you went in, you were taking tons of horse and mud into the building. So it wasn't clean inside. It wasn't clean outside. And all of this is going on amidst alcohol, amidst anger and angst, and also careful conversation. So where would they meet? I mean, think about it. You had like City Tavern there. You had lots of other little restaurants. There were all kinds of taverns. And there were parks and private homes, Franklin's house, and where Jefferson was. The sad part is that in this day and age, hardly any of it still survives. What's even more of a crime is that the building that Jefferson wrote the Declaration in, the tavern, the City Tavern is a big thing, were torn down well into the 20th century. The library building, it was something started by Franklin and others, was torn down well into the 20th century, and they've had to make replicas of them. And in some cases, the replicas were built just 25 years after they tore down the original structure. They were going to tear down Independence Hall, and they already started at it, and finally they stopped them. But a lot of it was gone. Inside, it's all changed. You know, we have ideas of what it looked like. There's images and stuff like that, but the windows are all new. A lot of the woodwork is all new because it changed over time. It was Victorianized, actually. They had, you know, all kinds of decorative stuff there. And everything took on a new look. So, you know, if our founders came back to life and went to Philadelphia after they were shocked by how Philadelphia looks, I guess they would be surprised that Independence Hall, in a slightly different fashion, still existed. They would be happy to see that Carpenter's Hall looked somewhat like they remembered, except it was missing its partition and rooms. Because you go into Carpenter's Hall, it's a wide open area. That was not the case years ago. So, I thought I would add this little bit of information just to talk about the people and what it was like and how, this group of individuals who didn't agree on much of anything got together and did it. Some of them brought their slaves. It's an interesting thing that here they are writing a document saying that all men are created equal and they're bringing their slaves. Pretty fascinating, isn't it? It's amazing how much the world has changed. I've often wondered, on a different side of this coin, that what would happen if the world of today could be viewed by our founding fathers. Let's just take Adams, Jefferson, and Franklin, because they were the ones that were really very much involved, and welcome them to the year 2018. Let's say they're just sitting at this table with me, and we're discussing. Can you imagine, first off, the shock on their part that this idea, which is, as I said, a byproduct of the Enlightenment, actually worked. A lot of them felt that it wasn't going to last that long because they were terrified that lesser individuals would start to run the government, and to a degree that has happened. Also, they would be shocked today to see the amount of tax that we pay. Think about this. This whole thing, a lot of it was over representation and taxation, which is exactly what we're going through today. But it was paltry compared to what we do today. Another thing, Franklin would probably be amused by much of how our life is today and the free and easy access one gets information on the internet. And I have a feeling that Mr. Franklin, who was a bawdy character, would find sites on that internet that we don't want to talk about. Now, John Adams would probably be the most impressed. Because you've got to remember, this was his baby. This was something that he worked so hard on. And I think that he would basically kind of nod in understanding that this is a pretty wonderful thing to see, and that his efforts were not in vain. Because that was his great fear, that he was going to do all this, and then it would not be administered well, and we would lose it. Well, Mr. Adams, thank you. It survived. And Jefferson, I think in his quiet, humorless way, he would observe everything and probably write about it, and probably be upset over certain aspects of society. He did not believe that women should be educated. And of course, he had his opinions on slavery, and he had his opinions on various races. So I think of the three, the one that would be most shocked and disappointed would be Jefferson. I think Franklin would be right at home in this age. I think John Adams, in his Puritan style, would be shocked, and as I said before, rather pleased. So, ladies and gentlemen, the world has changed an awful lot in the many years since the Declaration of Independence. Our whole style of life, our whole style of hygiene, our whole style of thought, our whole style of intellectual prowess has all changed. But some things never change. And that is basically the philosophy of John Locke, which is responsible for what's in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. and they are of life, liberty, and property. Of course, Jefferson changed the pursuit of happiness, which is ever so much the truth about this noble experiment called the United States. And yes, it has its flaws. Yes, it has its problems. But indeed, it is indeed the most incredible country, the most incredible development, because we took the Enlightenment and made it into something real, something viable. And the Enlightenment, which is challenged a lot today, has been with us and allowed us to expand this country into what it has become. So, a little talk, a little sharing, a little bit more information on this period of time. Hope you enjoy. And if you have comments and thoughts and questions, please share them, because it's great to have a dialogue, and it's also great to talk about history and try to make history come alive, because history has suffered a lot in the last 3 decades or so. We don't study history like we once did. We don't talk about it like we once did. And to tell you the truth, we should, because we have young minds, we have young people who are just starting, and we want to share this because it's important. Our history is important, because if you don't know your history, you don't know who you really are. Thank you.